Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can see and hear us all. Welcome to What's So Special About GEA Mentoring with Imogen Cooper and Hayley. Wrote the name, sorry, not a good start. And Andrew Guile. So this session is going to be for about 45 minutes, and after that there'll be time for questions for about 15 minutes. If you do have any questions, could you please put them in the Ask a Question tab at the bottom, because otherwise they get lost amongst the chat. And as much as we want to see you, they want to see your questions as well. You will notice throughout that we've got a donation to 7 Stories button down the bottom. So if you feel that you are able to donate to the to 7 Stories for the conference, we'd be really grateful. So I'm going to just quickly introduce. So Imogen Cooper. Hello, Imogen.
Hello.
Affectionately known as Mother Goose to us eggs. So Imogen is the founder of the Golden Egg Academy, and having worked with Barry Cunningham at the Chicken House as editorial director, her dream of starting the Golden Egg Academy was finally realised in 2013. To date, over 70 eggs now have publishing deals or agents. So massive. And Hayley, with a long career in publishing behind her, Hayley Fairhead has been a GEA editor for over 3 years, working on the Writing for Children and Young Adults course. And Andrew joined the GEA Foundation during 2017, which was followed by work on your novel in 2018. And he's now mentored by both Imogen and Hayley, and soon goes out on a mission to agents. Very exciting. So I'm gonna hand over to Hayley. I'm just going to toggle off, and I will be back at in 45 minutes. So over to you, Hayley.
Thank you, Debbie. That's lovely. Okey-doke. Well, so welcome everybody to another session of the Conference. I hope you've all enjoyed the day so far. It's been amazing what everybody's put together for the weekend. Yes, thank you for joining us. So this session, as Debbie said, we're going to be talking about what's so special about Golden Egg mentoring. It's something that lots of our writers set their sights on Golden Egg mentoring as the big goal, and they want to get to it. But I think there's quite a lot that they don't necessarily really know about it. So what we thought we'd do is try and do a session where we kind of demystify the whole process a little bit. So we've already sort of been introduced by Debbie. I don't think there's much else to say really, other than the fact that, yes, Imogen and I have been mentoring Andrew, and Andrew's just about to go out on submission. So it seemed like the perfect time to share all our wisdom with you. And yes, again, any questions, we'll discuss those all at the end. So before we go any further, obviously we've probably got quite a few kind of egg curious amongst us who don't necessarily know what Golden Egg mentoring is. So I wonder, Imogen, whether you might be able to sort of give a bit an outline about Golden Egg mentoring, path to mentoring, and what it actually involves.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you, Hayley. Yes. We really do want to demystify this process. It's a wonderful process, and Hayley and I have thoroughly enjoyed working with Andrew on his wonderful Dragon middle grade. And it's really exciting for us as editors to go in and work as deeply on a manuscript as we do in mentoring. But how do you get there in the first place? And I know lots of you want to know that. Well, at Golden Egg, mentoring is the final stage before we take you out on submission to agents and publishers. What we hope that you will do is that you will come into Golden Egg and you will learn some tools of writing, of story craft, to go in your toolbox on the courses first. But there are always cases where we pull people out of those courses because they get to mentoring sooner than we expect them to, and that's possible. But mentoring is by invitation only. And the reason for that is because what we really, really want you to do, as I say, is make sure you've got tools in your toolbox for your career, and that you learn on those courses with a peer group, so you've got that support. And I know Andrew has loved having the support from his, the other eggs in his group, and that you go through that with that support and with a group of people who understand what it's like, and how tough it can be, and the highs and lows of the writing process, but also about the content of the courses and what you are studying at that point. Now, once you have gone through those courses, or you've gone, at least part way through, so you've done writing for children and young people, perhaps, then you can have a mentoring assessment, and that is when we read the manuscript and we decide whether the structure is working well enough. So your characters are three-dimensional. The concept, so the thing that you will sell this story on, your one-line pitch, and how important that sort of thing is these days, is working. And the voice is nearly there. Because when we take you on for mentoring, what we are doing is really preparing you for an agent or publisher. So what we want to do is for it not to take too long. So we hope it will take 6 months, a year. But in that time, you are looking very carefully with us, with your industry editor. And we give you an industry editor at that time. And Hayley's working with me because she is in the process of becoming an industry editor. So that's why she was working with me, with Andrew. So we are looking at every layer in detail of this manuscript, from beginning to end. So when you're on the courses, you're educated into seeing the novel as a whole. And I will talk more about that in my talk later on at the end of the day, but how important it is to be able to see the wood for the trees. And that a lot of that comes from those courses. And then when you get to mentoring, you are looking at subplots, you are looking at kind of mid-ground characters, you're looking at setting, you're looking at continuity right from the beginning until the end. And, that is really hard work and really concentrated and detailed work. And unless you have built the foundations by understanding structure in detail, implementing that so you don't have a soggy middle, or and really understanding the motivations of your characters so that you know what they're doing scene to scene, that the more you can do there, the less we have to do in the mentoring stage. And of course, because you are working one-to-one with an industry editor whenever you want to, or whenever is needed, it will be it's a more expensive process than being on a course. So being on a course is the place to really learn those tools. And I know Andrew's going to talk more about the tenacity that you need before you get to the stage where you are working really closely one-to-one with us. Have I remembered everything?
I think you've covered an awful lot there, Imogen. Yes. Sounds good.
I've got nothing left to say.
I know, we might as well leave now. The one thing I was going to say was that I think you touched on it, Imogen, actually, talking about, you know, the courses before mentoring and the community that you build up there. And actually, when you're on those first courses, you know, to have that, it's quite secure, and you're very much in a lovely little nest and all looked after, you know, and you have your group. But as you go through the process, it's more about working independently, getting you ready for that time when you're an author in a publishing house and you're you know, out there in the big wide world all by yourself. And it's all about getting to that point. So having that community still sort of behind you from your previous courses is so crucial. But yes, it's getting to mentoring. It is about working more independently, and that's what we're hoping, you know, you're able to do. And certainly Andrew is all ready to fly.
Absolutely
ready to fly. So we kind of, Imogen, you kind of touched on this a little bit, because we were going to talk about the kind of nuts and bolts of the sessions and how each mentoring session works. I mean, we probably could just touch on a little bit more about how we do that, and maybe Andrew, you could have a bit of input there as well.
Sure.
So yes, the nuts and bolts of the sort of the first sessions and how we went about doing the early sessions, and then
Shall I start, Andrew? And then
by all means.
I promise I'll shut up. So when we've assessed you for whether you're ready for mentoring, your Golden Egg editor will pass the manuscript on to an industry editor who will do a quick read. And then, Andrew, we looked at the big things that still needed, you know, there was still a few structural niggles, weren't there? And then we chunked it down, because I think that gives a writer confidence. So talking about it in overview, giving you the notes, and then asking you to write in thirds. Did you find that helpful?
It's difficult to cast my mind back now to a certain extent. But yes, I mean, I remember we started with a rewrite of Act 1 in terms of there not being enough normal world at the start. And yes, I mean, breaking it down into little bits, looking at the start and then looking at the middle and then looking at the end. It's certainly from the start, I expected to look at the end. I imagined that the end would require some work to really sing, sort of thing. But I suppose when I entered mentoring, at least when I applied to go into mentoring, I thought I had to wait until the manuscript was essentially structurally sound before I would be ready for that. And I think I was broadly right that was sort of what you're looking for what you said earlier. So I mean, at that stage, I thought it started all right. But I mean, when you came in and said, well, actually, hang on a minute, you know, we need a little bit more of the normal world at the start. And I think my draft, as I had it at the time, was it pretty much jumped straight in with the inciting incident. I mean, there was very little before that. So it was a little bit too immediate. So we started there.
Yeah, which is not a bad thing at all, just so people know.
Everybody panics. Where's my inciting incident?
No, absolutely. But what we were trying to draw out of Andrew a little bit more was the connection with the main character, because, you know, the emotional engagement of a reader, that umbilical cord between the reader and the main character, is so vital, you know, and is the reason why most children read. And so bringing that to the fore a bit, and particularly because, Andrew, your main protagonist has such a beautiful relationship with, you know, the little dragon that he hatches. You know, we really wanted to see that from, you know, chapter 1, who this boy was, and so what the potential he might have, and why it's him, why he's so special. But you've now done that beautifully.
I think, I mean, that was I mean, I think from our first ever session, I might be digressing off the question here a little bit, but I'm sure we'll cover everything during the session. But I mean, when I joined Foundations in 2017 and found out that mentoring existed, I knew that's where I wanted to be. You know, I mean, the massive draw of Golden Egg for me was to start on a path which I sort of hoped I would finish, but I made no assumptions about that. But to start on a path that could end up with whatever I'd come up with, having sort of like a direct line via the slush pile to people who could read it and say yes to it. And that was a massive draw, and I knew I needed to go through mentoring for that. And what I was really looking forward to in mentoring was just going through that sort of editing and polishing process with, you know, industry experienced people like yourselves. And there's no doubt that that's what I got. And you know, and so much insight came in, and right from the start. I mean, the rewrite of my first chapter brought in a lot of what we discussed in the first session. And in the first session, you nailed theme straight away. You said, right, theme is love and it's freedom. And as soon as I knew that, it's not that I didn't know that, but a lot of the time when you look at your story, when you're writing it, you can probably imagine 15 different themes that you could, in theory, tailor that story to. And there is a real question mark over, and a lot of uncertainty, certainly from a writer's perspective, of knowing which way to tailor it. You've got so many choices that having the experience of yourselves to say, well, look, I think a child is going to go more this way, or really attach themselves to that aspect of the story. And that was something, you know, way back. I mean, my first draft that I started Foundations with, in fact, I only had about 10,000 words when I started Foundations, and it's 57 something thousand now. So I only had the very kernel of the early story when I started Foundations. But as it initially developed in the first draft, I had these, they were just dragon eggs. Dragons didn't hatch until 75% of the way through the story. And my editor at the time said, and as soon as the dragon was hatched and he came out, and the relationship that you see between Tristan and Cathar, Tristan person, Cathar dragon, now was there in that first draft. I mean, as soon as he hatched, it was there straight away. And quite rightly, you know, my editor at the time said, whoa, hang on. This is what the kid is going to latch onto, which is essentially boy and his dog. I mean, my dragon is essentially a puppy in the way that he behaves and acts. And so I had to bring that forward, and I saw the sense in that. So you can see during Foundations, I tore up 50% or more of my book and started again. And in fact, at the start of Foundations, I'd written the whole thing in first person. And it was sort of like, no, third person has to be third person. So I had to rewrite it all in third. So the amount of work that had to go into changing it was massive. But just to come back to what I started with, as soon as I knew that the emotional attachment was sort of boy and dragon, or boy and puppy, if you think of it that way. You know, one of the first things, again, that happened in our first session, I think it was your suggestion, Imogen, was when you said, well, hang on, you know, perhaps he can sort of like have this in his backstory, this desire, or that he's always wanted a dog. And, you know, I mean, again, to me, that was just, again, you look at it now and I think, God, that's so astute. And in some ways, it's so obvious because I've always known I was describing a dog, and it was based upon my brother and sister-in-law's Cocker Spaniel. I mean, I absolutely adore him. And everything I've written about Cathar is based upon me going there and rumbling and tumbling with him in many respects. But again, it was that astuteness and that savvy that kicked straight in. That is what I was sort of like waiting for and wanting. Because it makes such a difference. And then when I had to rewrite much of the first act, to be honest, but certainly those initial starting chapters, it was so much easier when I had these anchors. I had the thematic anchors of love and freedom. And so I have my main character talking about, he lives, of course, there's only us three that know about what my book's all about, although some of my Foundation friends listening in will have an idea. But he lives in a camper van with his mum, an old VW camper van, and they don't speak to anyone. They stay on their own. They keep moving from campsite to campsite every 2 or 3 days. And so he doesn't have any friends, and he's longed for a dog, but there is no room for a dog in the camper van. And in the first chapter, he sort of like thinks about that, and he says, he had a mouse once, but he had to keep the mouse in the cage because, of course, the mouse would run away. But he saw a mouse in a cage and thought, I don't like having a mouse in a cage. And that tied to the theme of freedom, which had been nailed at our first session. And so all that sort of comes into it. I actually forget what the question was now.
We were talking about the nuts and bolts of the sessions, but it's all good. It's all good. I think.
So if you want me to say a little bit about the nuts and bolts of the session, so yes, I mean that's how it started, was with the bigger structural stuff. And then after that, we would see each other on Skype, and at the end of every session, I would sort of like email you back with what I thought we'd discussed and what I thought we'd agreed that I'd go away with when we'd meet next. And I was largely, if not entirely, in control of how long I thought I needed to achieve what we'd just discussed. And we'd normally jump by 3 or 4 months. I suspect other people perhaps do it more quickly. But it really depends on the complexity of the manuscript, and I think that's really worth thinking about. So the simpler the manuscript, obviously it will take less time, but you had a lot of layers to go through, didn't you?
No,
and then I remember next we went on to, because my book is intended to be the first in a trilogy. So I think that's where we sort of went next. That I think you were both very interested to see where I thought the trilogy was going to go. And I don't know if you ever printed it out, but I then created this trilogy arc tracker.
Oh, yes.
Which if you printed it out and you actually wanted to read it, you would have to put it on A3. I mean, it's massive. And it's basically 3 beat sheets. For anyone who's read Blake Snyder's Save the Cat and his beat sheets, it's basically 3 beat sheets in a row for book 1, book 2, book 3, and then some overarching thematic issues at the top. So I think that's where we went next. And so I had to plot out books 2 and 3, and I knew what I wanted to happen at the end of the trilogy. I knew where I wanted it to go, but I hadn't thought much at all about how I was actually going to get there after book 1.
And this is something, sorry Andrew, but this is something really, really important. So for any of you who are writing a trilogy or writing 2 books in the same story, the reason that we asked Andrew to do that was because we wanted to know what was most important in this first book in order to bring that out right at the beginning, so that that was as clear as possible. And also in terms of the main character's background and the situation with his father and things like that, Hayley and I needed to understand that, which didn't come into this book, in order to help Andrew shape the characters and their motivations in this first book, didn't we, Hayley?
Yeah, absolutely. And then so it was great to be able to see all the work that you've done and everything. You can see how far how much work you've done at thinking about what happens next, and just making sure that the seeds are sown, I guess, and that in this initial book.
But for me, one thing that really struck me at that stage is that when I started Foundations and we started looking at story structure and beat sheets and moving on to story foundation sheets, and I'm not sure what the latest incarnation of those is, but if I had gone into mentoring without having a pretty good, I wouldn't say perfect, it continues to grow, an understanding of story structure, inciting incident, call to adventure, refusal of the call, going through the portal into the woods at the end of Act 1 and into Act 2. If I didn't have some idea of that and the various other stages that stories go through, to have actually mapped out books 2 and 3 would have been a heck of a task, because I would really have been floundering in terms of thinking, well, what should come next? And is that right? Is this right or that right? And because I think I had a fairly decent understanding of sort of like story structure, I was able to move through that planning of books 2 and book 3 in relatively quick order. I mean, I'm not saying anything in there is set in stone, but I probably knocked both of those out in a week.
Yeah, but I think that just demonstrates how important it is being able to do the courses. And it's like Imogen was saying before about tools in the toolbox. It's, you know, what we're trying to do here is make sure that our writers aren't just able to do book 1, but that, you know, when they're an author in a publishing house, that yes, they can get a second book out in the 6-month deadline, because they have all those skills that they've learned from us to be, you know, at their disposal. And I think it's crucial to have that background. And that kind of brings me on to what we talk. We've sort of touched upon this, actually. We probably can just briefly go over this. You know, how do you know you're ready for mentoring? I mean, Imogen, we've talked about the importance of character, structure, obviously a clear concept. And those are the kind of things we're looking at before we say to somebody, yes, you're ready for mentoring. I think, Andrew, you had some quite interesting things to say about, you know, the importance of putting the work in. I mean, we've already talked about, you know, doing the courses and all the reading that you need to do as well. But I know that that's something that you feel, you know, that was really important, that you were, you know, really
passionate about.
Definitely.
Getting all of those.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, when I started Foundations, it wasn't just Foundations that I was doing. I mean, the structure that was given to us in Foundation was fantastic. I think the most powerful things for me that really moved me on was the homework that we were given during Foundations, which was literally to sit in front of a movie with a beat sheet and actually write it down as these inciting events and call to action and all this sort of stuff was happening in a movie. And to start with, I couldn't see it at all. You know, I'd have to watch it twice. And now, I think my wife gets a bit annoyed.
I was going to say, you're the annoying person in the film.
I'll sit there and I'll go, that call to action's a bit late, isn't it? You know, what's going on? Why did they do it this way? Why didn't they do it that way?
We are the most annoying people in the room now whilst watching a film.
But that was brilliant, and that was really quite formative for me in terms of sort of like really pulling together what I thought I knew about writing and how to pull a story together. But the other thing was the one-to-ones, and the one-to-ones are the really powerful things that thrust you forward in Foundations. But I didn't just, I mean, before GEA, I'd sort of like plugged myself into Scooby. So I'd been to the ScoobyCon at the end of 2016, which is where I first saw you guys at your table near the stairs. Let's go upstairs. Yeah. But I'd also started listening to podcasts. I got Writing Magazine, and I used to still do love the bit in Writing Magazine every month where James McCreek just absolutely tears to shreds the first 300 words of someone's story. And he absolutely slaughters everything in one. I think he just chooses the one that he can say the most nastiest things about every single week. But it's a combination of all of that. And reading books. So it was doing the online, doing my homework, listening to podcasts about story structure and all this sort of stuff. And all of that sort of sunk in. I just soaked it up and really tried to plug myself in as much as I could to people who I could learn off.
Yeah, and I think that's sorry.
You can
just say a little bit about story and how it reaches across, all mediums, because I think that's something, and particularly when we're thinking about getting you to agents and publishers these days, it's something that agents and publishers are thinking about a lot, because of course selling the rights to a book, for TV or film or even for a play or is something that an agent and publisher will be thinking about. And so in terms of us looking at films and looking at novels at the same time, it's a really, really useful thing to do, because actually concentrating on that through line through any story and how similar they will be. You know, it could be Shakespeare, it could be Greek tragedy, it can be Hollywood film, it can be a children's novel. Obviously, they will change a little bit, and we do talk a bit about the beginning of a children's novel and how quickly that has to start, talking about your inciting incident in comparison to some and material for adults. But, you know, essentially, the structure is the same whatever you're looking at. And so, you know, if you are one of those people who can see, you know, what's going to happen next in a film, that's incredibly useful for your writing process. I agree. Yeah.
I think the only other thing I was going to say, which I think is really evident from what Andrew's been saying about all the work you put in, and I think it's at the beginning. I think that you sort of think that you're going to be, you know, you'll get to mentoring stage and there'll just be a few things to do, or you'll get to, you know, I know, but I think, you know, it is a constant process, and you know, you'll be editing your book right up into the minute it goes to the printing press. It's you know, you'll you know, it's a constant process, and it's something, you know, if you spend any time when you haven't read your book for a month or something, and then you'll go back to it, oh yeah, I want to change that, and I'll you know, there's always stuff to do. It is a process, and you know, you can think you've done everything, but there's always a little bit more to do.
Yeah, and that's really important, actually, Hayley, the putting it away, I mean, you know, and certainly when, you know, at any point in your writing, putting the story away for a few days, and we talk about latent processing a lot, you know, something that if you've struggled over a knotty problem, and you can't see the way out of it, and it, you know, gets really, you get a little bit depressed about it even, you know, you've reached your worst point in the story of your writing, then, you know, putting it away for a little bit and allowing your brain to just do its job, and for the neurons to fire without you actually thinking too hard about it is another important part of the process. Sorry, yes, go on, Hayley.
No, I was just saying we've covered some of these questions already, so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. So, Andrew, I'm going to ask you, what did you do when we suggested changes that you didn't agree with? I don't know what you're going to say now.
there weren't many, were there?
No, I don't think
there weren't that many. I mean, my attitude, I mean, I certainly remember saying to you near the start that I thought I was a bit of a pushover to a certain extent. In other words, everything you said, I thought, brilliant, yes, I'll do that. this comes in, brilliant, yeah, I'll do that. I was more than I've always been more than happy to take on board. But what you've said, and to do mentoring and not to take on board what you said would be pretty foolish, really, I think. But at the same time, it was always clear to me as to why you were saying it, and it was always clear from you to me why you were saying it, and again, I could see, I think looking back, I could see, because of understanding story structure, as I did at the time, I could see why it made a difference. I mean, one of the early things which I think I resisted a little bit, wasn't it, was taking Cyrus out of Act 1.
Oh, yes.
And Cyrus doesn't come into Act 2. But at the time, I thought to myself, well, yeah, but he's this really nasty guy who's making my protagonist's life so much difficult, and I want that conflict in there. But the thing I didn't spot then, but is blindingly obvious to me now, is that the conflict at the end of the book is with the evil Queen Melinda. And so I needed the conflict at the start of the book to be with the evil Queen Melinda, or at least the projection of her through this nasty henchman called Obadiah. And so to muddle that conflict with the conflict coming from Cyrus, who's essentially just somebody who makes the protagonist's life more difficult rather than being necessarily an antagonist, although he is an antagonistic force in a way. But I couldn't see that. I didn't see that conflict. I didn't see that complication that I'd added into Act 1, which muddied the water. And even when he said, not sure Cyrus should be there and stuff like this, I still wanted to resist a little bit, didn't I? And I think that the next draft he was still there, wasn't he? And it was after that where you said, well, I still don't think you should be there. And I think in some respects I could see the tension that you experienced from your side of the camera. You don't really want to tell me how to write my book. It's still my book. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I did want to know if you were absolutely clear in saying that he needed to come out. And I seem to recall actually asking you and saying, look, are you really sure that he needs to come out? And then you said, yeah, I think he needs to come out. And that was more than good enough for me. And I don't think there was anything else after that, was there? Really?
Possibly not. I think that I do remember saying to you, because you weren't sure, and I remember saying to you, why don't you just do it? Why don't you just write a couple of scenes? Write the scenes if he is in there, and just see, a bit of a speculative, and if you don't like it, we don't have to do it.
Yeah, that's right. I remember that now, and that is what I did. That is what I did.
And if it hadn't worked and you hadn't been happy, then
exactly.
that would have been
once I'd done it.
Your story.
I could see that was the right way to go.
Yeah.
And I think there was one thing at the end as well. There's one thing at the end as well with Melinda in the final scene where you didn't like me having her giggle.
Oh yes.
But I stuck to my guns on that.
You did.
Because I'd actually had my youngest is just turned 13. So when going back into last year, he was 12 and all his friends were 12. So I had a couple of his. He didn't read it, but I had a couple of his friends read it. Read the whole book, and one of their younger 10-year-old brothers read the book. And I quizzed them afterwards, what did you like? Who did you like? Who were your favourite characters? And of their sort of like 2 or 3 favourite characters, they all said Melinda. Oh. And you only see her in the climax. Mm. So I thought to myself, well, I think I've got it right. And I specifically wanted her to come across, not in a sickly sweet sort of way, but I wanted her to come across in quite a very relaxed, smarmy, I'm not going to lose this situation sort of way, supremely confident. And that's why I wanted the giggle in there. So I saw your point.
It's still there.
It's still there. And who knows, if I'm lucky in attracting an agent or, heaven forbid, a publisher, they'll probably tell me to take it out. I think we'll still have a good chat.
It'll be fine. Yeah.
I think the thing about hopefully what we're bringing across is that this is a collaborative process. It's all about and if you're not happy with something, then obviously we'll discuss it. And
I think that was probably the only thing I really pushed back on, wasn't it?
Yeah,
that was about it. So it's not nothing massive. It's one word somewhere, but it wasn't big.
No, that's great. That's great.
No, go on, Imogen. Yeah.
I just wanted to. Are there other questions that we need to ask?
So we've got. I'm trying to think. I mean, how do you feel your manuscript has changed from the beginning of the process until now? That's quite an interesting.
Yeah. I mean, structurally, we changed the first bit, and Cyrus came out of Act 1 and didn't come into Act 2. The ending changed, but not massively. No. I mean, the kernel of the story is there. I mean, I think we mainly sort of like, we looked at the wider trilogy, and we looked at every single individual character arc, and we made sure that they were singing. So I suppose what it really did was take a story that was a bit like this, and really brought it together, found the spine, kept everything pinned to that spine, so it's a whole lot tighter. And as a result, it's gone down from 70,000 words to 57,000 words. And I think it's fair to say as well that the line edits that I had, I think on a couple of occasions I had line edits when you've actually gone through one or more chapters and taking superfluous writing out, or looked at things that could have been more directed, or actually saying, well, this is where you need to bring in an emotional reaction, or you're missing an emotional reaction here. So really pinning those arcs and emotional reactions to specific changes and turns in the story, really just nailing those on and making them perfectly clear. And certainly I was guilty of being a little bit too subtle, I think, at times. It was might be. I mean, my thought process at the time when you pointed these out is that it might be okay for an adult, but perhaps for a children's book, you needed to nail it really, and really make it quite specific and bring it, but just tug it up a little bit and just so that it sticks out. And so I suppose essentially you turned it from the kernel of hopefully a good adventure story to being something which is now, again, hopefully of publishable standard. And that's the transition.
Yeah, really. I think that's it. It's honing and chipping away to get the gem. Yeah,
exactly. And more honing.
There's always more you can do.
There's always more, and I think that's and isn't this a really important thing to emphasize, is that, you know, of course the goal for everybody is to get published, but if you don't enjoy the journey and the editorial process, and a collaborative editorial process at that, then it's going to be a lot harder, because even when you've had that first novel published, you know, there's the next one and there's the next one, and you know, and that's tough. And as both of you have said, you know, you need the tools in your toolbox from, you know, that you've developed in order to be able to deal with that, and to embrace it and embrace learning about the next thing that's going to challenge you along the way. Yeah. But
I mean, I definitely, if I am, you know, lucky enough to be successful in placing this book somewhere, I definitely think that I've had the luxury of you know, perfecting a book at my own pace with yourselves, in a way in which in the future, had I just jumped straight into, you know, getting a book deal, I would have had to have condensed that into maybe 6 months with a publishing house or something. And so I think that's definitely something which I think is going to benefit me if I'm successful in the future. And personally, I have no fears about, you know, being told I've got to do book 2 in 6 months, because I actually feel confident enough that I can do it. I mean, I'll still have to take a heck of a deep breath, you know, and carve out time and get up at 5 in the morning, like I've heard Maya Leonard used to, when she was still doing all her thespian-y sort of theatre stuff, or what have you. But yeah, I mean, I'll take a deep breath and carve out a lot of time, but I know I can do it. And you know, it's all part and parcel of everything I've learned, but in particular, you know, the last 18 months or so, really polishing this rough diamond into hopefully a bit of something a bit more shiny with you guys.
Yeah, great, good. Well, so before we sort of open up to other questions and things, just final question for you, Andrew. What would you say to somebody at the start of the mentoring process?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I would say, I mean, it linked to what I've just said. I would say take your time. I would say don't be gung-ho and desperate to get to the point where, you know, you're desperate to submit or something like that. You know, your book will take the time that it will take. You know, I mean, I've been in Golden Egg now for 4 years, and I still remember when I started in Foundations, and I forget exactly what was said, but I think the indication there was a very big sort of this is the real world sort of setting the scene explanation that was given to us right on the start of our first day, which is, this might take you 2 or 3 years to work on this book or something like this. I was thinking, 2 or 3 years? Are you having a laugh? I want this done in 12 months. And you know, reality check time, you know, take your time, get it right. You know, I viewed the last 4 years, and particularly the time in mentoring, as me sort of like as an apprentice. This book is my apprentice piece, it's my journeyman's piece, as it were, looking at it from a more traditional sort of apprentice point of view. And I wanted to take the time, and I hope I have taken the time and used it wisely in terms of really trying to learn how to write a book, and really learning as much about the craft as I can. And fingers crossed it will stand me in good stead if anyone likes anything I write.
That's brilliant. Before we end, I probably ought to just say 2 minutes, sorry Debbie, about what happens once the book is ready, because I suspect there'll be quite a few questions about that I might be able to answer very quickly. So once the book is ready, we talk to Andrew about his covering letter, about his pitch. We've gone back and forth over his pitch. Debbie's nodding because he's done the same. Yes. And we also talk to you about who might be most appropriate in terms of all the agents that are out there for you. And these days we've now started an agents hub, so we are going to be talking to agents regularly and having coffee mornings, and they're getting newsletters on a regular basis with the one line pitches to go out to as many agents as possible. And that's a big thing. So in terms of when you get to mentoring and you get your industry editor, that's when we put our feelers out for who this might be right for, and really help you in that transition as well. So I thought I'd better just add that before we finish.
Brilliant. Great.
Lovely.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes,
we've enlightened everyone.
Okay, so we're going to go into some questions. Let's have a look. So the top question is, does it often happen where eggs can finish their course but don't get invited to be mentored?
It happens. What tends to happen is that you come to the end of the course and then you are given, there are lots of things that you will be learning on that course, and that you may well need, because the courses are very intense, as Andrew will tell you, you then need time to implement a lot of the things that you've learned. So a lot of that, so people often take a few months out to work by themselves, but checking in occasionally with their editor, and to try and get to that mentoring level. And you can ask for a mentoring assessment at any time. However, we are tough about it, because if we don't feel you're ready, then it would be foolhardy for us and unfair on you to invite you to that stage at that juncture, because you will be spending money. We will have raised your expectations massively, and you may be a way off, and I think we don't want to take your money, because essentially you have to pay us. We don't want to take your money until you are ready, and because that would not be fair.
Yeah. I think it is worth just mentioning as well, Imogen, that, whilst people are in that kind of phase where they finished a course before mentoring, there's obviously the Golden Egg Club, isn't there, that's going to be starting next month, which is going to be a really good support during that time between courses, where you've still got editors sort of giving, helpful advice and so on, and a supportive network. So that's sort of, there are other things available. Yes,
to ensure that you feel supported in that time.
Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. So another question from Victoria. Do you get a sense that mentees are highly sought after by agents as a result of the GEA process?
Yes, absolutely, Victoria. We go to, when we can, we go to London Book Fair, and I regularly go to Bologna Book Fair as well and talk to agents there. And yeah, absolutely. Because they know that at Golden Egg you've had, you have been trained in the craft and you've trained yourself in the craft. You understand that the industry is a difficult place and very, very competitive, and they really appreciate that. So when they know that we're on the selective courses, and for those 70 plus that are now with agents and publishers, they came in just from the selective courses. The agents and publishers know that we we know the business, and our aim is to get people published. So, we have the knowledge. We, whether, we're working with Chicken House, Penguin Random, Simon and Schuster, Guppy Books, DFB, whoever it is, we're constantly talking to people and aware of what is needed for the industry, as well as being able to teach storycraft, at great depth. The agents are really, really looking for people who understand the craft, have a great concept, because we know that absolutely that's what's needed now to be able to sell that book on, one line, and who understand the industry as well.
I think ultimately, a manuscript that comes from Golden Egg, it goes to the top of the slush pile, doesn't it, really, Imogen, as opposed to the bottom. It's the next one on the list. They do come back ever so quickly. They do. So, it's definitely puts you at an advantage.
Okay, thank you. So one from Sarita. Why is mentoring only open to members who have done courses? Some of us are at different points in the process and have done courses elsewhere, but like the look of or the sound of your mentoring.
Hayley, do you want me to take that, or shall I?
Well, I think we've already discussed a lot about the importance of doing the courses with Golden Egg, and the emphasis on structure, on character, and having all of that as your in your toolbox. If you've got all of those things, and you can take those forward to future books as well. But I think the other thing to stress is that we do try and tailor things to the individual as well. So it's something we would want you to have some Golden Egg background, I think, if possible. But if you are particularly, if your manuscript is particularly shines through, then mentoring, we have taken people on for mentoring quite quickly.
Yes, we don't do it very often because we find we actually have a lot of people who've done MAs and actually, yes, who have done other courses. But what we tend to find is that they'll still have a saggy middle in their novel, or they won't have understood structure as well as they need to, as Andrew has said, to be able to write the next book in 6 months. And we need to be convinced of the fact that that you are able to do that and that you've got those tools. If you can convince us of that, then we will look at it. I have no interest in holding anybody back because our reputation is staked on how many people we can get to publication and to agents. So, honestly, if you are ready, you will be accelerated, but we're not going to do it unless you are ready. And that's, the guarantee that you have from us.
Lovely. Thank you. So a question from Katie: is there financial support available for those who need to go on to mentoring?
There isn't at the moment. We are offering 2 places on my 12-week course free, and that's through the Golden Egg Award. So for people who are having hardship, or and are in real difficulty financially, or who are from an underrepresented group, because as I said in my talk at the beginning of the day, that is so important, because children from those groups need to see themselves in books, and we are aiming to get people who are writing and are from those backgrounds into their books into the hands of children, and that's very important. So but as we move on, and as hopefully Golden Egg grows, there may well be some support there. I know other people who have been on mentoring have got Arts Council grants, and we can certainly talk to you about that.
Okay, lovely, thank you. So another one from Victoria. what has been the most rewarding part of mentoring? And this is for all of you. So, most rewarding part of mentoring.
Oh, it's got to be the transformation when you see it. You know what it was when we first saw it, and now here it is, ready to fly. That's the thing for me. Being able to, knowing that it's all ready and it's going to get into the hands of children.
Yeah, and working with, sorry, Andrew, and working with really interesting people and being able to slip into the worlds that, you've created. I mean, it really has been wonderful working with Andrew, and with other people. So it's wonderful. It really is. Andrew, sorry.
Same for me, really. As I say, my goal right from the start was to try and have the to get to a point where I produced something which I was being told by people who know or should know what they're talking about, and certainly I think do know what they're talking about, is of a publishable standard. So to get to that, whether I get anywhere with it is another question. But the fact that I've now gone through a process of getting something to a publishable standard is massive, massive.
Yeah, real achievement. Yeah.
Smashing. So this is for Andrew. Andrew, can you talk about balancing the course with working around your lifestyle, your job, family, friends, if you found a routine?
Yes, sort of. I have to say I'm very, 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 very lucky. I have my own business, and some years ago, slightly before joining Golden Egg, I had agreed with my business partner that I was going to work at home on a Friday, and he knew full well that I would do essential work during that time for the business, but otherwise I would be writing. But it took me 5 or 6 years to carve out that opportunity to create those Fridays for myself. I had to have another solicitor under me at the business. I'm a lawyer, as some people will know, most people probably don't. I needed someone else to work on those days, so I had to wait until I had someone of sufficient seniority underneath me to look after my part of the business when I was not there, or my cases. So I managed to carve out that sort of time. And I confess, I hope my business partner's not watching this, but sometimes I have some long lunch breaks. And when I heard that MG Lennon started to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning in the summer months, sometimes I do that. But I got myself an iPad with a keyboard, and quite often I'd be taking my sons to trampoline lessons, or I might take it on, to work with me if I was on the train, and I can just crack it out and just grab 15 minutes, 10 minutes. And I think you need to be able to do that. Again, I know that some people find it very difficult just to suddenly switch into where they were or pick up where they left off. I find it quite easy. I know people might find that intensely irritating, but I do actually find it quite easy. I read the last couple of paragraphs that I wrote, and that orientates me, and then I just keep going. And that's probably one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give to anyone in terms of writing a book, is just keep going. You've got to get to the end. I mean, I'd self-published a couple of books before I started Golden Egg. So finishing a book was not an issue that I personally thought I had, because I knew I could finish a story. But yeah.
Fabulous, thank you. And I think the last question, could you tell us more about themes in emotional engagement, please? Briefly, very briefly.
Yes, we have got 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Right. Okay. So it's those themes that the things that make us tick as humans, that are universal, and the things that are important to children around the world are the things that, really need to be at the heart of every children's book if you're going to sell it around the world. But it really is, in terms of why we read as humans, is because we want to see somebody else struggle and overcome. And themes around that, whether it's coping with death or loss, whether it is love and freedom, as it is in Andrew's novel, these are the things that every child can identify with. And when we're talking about selling a book into different territories, selling it to TV and film, those are the things that editors and publishers and agents are looking for, because it means that it has a really wide audience, and it appeals to our hearts. And as adults, sometimes we read for the intellectual interest, I was thinking of Virgin Suicides, that Jeffrey Eugenides novel. And had that been written from the point of view of one of those girls, that could have been a YA. But because it was written kind of watching these girls, and the kind of analytical process that goes on there, it's very definitely adult. And I think it's, every child, and actually most of us adults, wants that connection, and and that's at the heart of really good storytelling. Hayley, do you want to say anything else?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's you've hit the nail on the head there, really, Imogen. I mean, yes, the emotional connection. You want to see the protagonist grow and change, and that's why children read. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we're only 40 seconds over, which is good.
We've all behaved.
Amazing.
Well done. So a massive thank you. Thank you so much for being here. It's been so interesting. I hope everyone else has got a lot from it today. A big thank you to Annalise, who's in the background doing all the admin. And
Thank you.
Thank you to thank you to all the Honkrant helpers.
Oh, absolutely.
And can I just remind you of the little blue button down the bottom there, where if you'd like to donate to 7 Stories, please do. But otherwise, thank you all so much, and hope to see you again at another event.
Thanks very much.
Cheerio. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Is it just us now?
It should be stopping.